Hey folks, I'm JC from One Shot Adventures, and wow, 10,000 subscribers. I am just so humble and grateful to this community for your viewership, creative ideas, and such kind words. You're an awesome, polite, and supportive group of fans, so truly thank you. And so today I'm gonna do something a little different and a little bit more personal. I'm gonna go back in time and talk about my top 5 adventures that inspired me, changed my perspective on gaming, and still live vibrantly in my mind. Now, naturally, most of these adventures come from my youth, when I first started gaming in the 80s and 90s, way back when. This is a time when tabletop RPGs were really emerging, evolving, and being played and authored by folks who didn't cut their teeth on wargaming. And so many of these adventures that I'll talk about, well, they're not great by today's standards, although some are, but they were each trying to do something very different. And as a result, were very influential to me as a GM, adventure writer, and even as a professional video game crafter, which I've been most of my career. But before we dive in, I'll give you a warning that there are some slight spoilers ahead. Nothing that would ruin an adventure if you haven't played it, but if you want to approach any of these adventures completely fresh, well, go order a dwarven ale back at the tavern and tell a story about your last adventure to the crew there. All right, ready? Here we go. Number 5, Rafts of Kron. We're gonna start with a weird one, and many of you have probably never even heard of this adventure. As part of the expert line of D&D wilderness adventures, Rafts of Kron had a daring premise. The heroes must save a princess from the Tritons who've kidnapped her. Well, that part's straightforward. However, the Tritons are on the verge of a civil war, and the players find themselves immersed and plunged into a complex underwater world of politics and factions, sea elves, aquatic battles, vampires, and massive floating warship towns. The backdrop of this adventure was just so imaginative. It was a complete break from the dungeons and typical wilderness hex crawls that I had seen thus far. The idea of adventuring deep underwater, along with supporting mechanics that really changed the game, just unlocked the idea for me that settings of RPGs could go far beyond dungeons and haunted islands and castles, and that surprising players was an incredibly effective tool at the table. The adventure, however, was very much flawed. As a newer GM, I really struggled running this ambitious adventure. Its plot wasn't really summarized, and it was just very hard for me to grok how to prepare it. And there were a lot of plot holes that stumped my players early on, and I just wasn't ready to solve them as a GM. For example, the story can come to a halt in softlock until players seek out dolphins and talk to them, something that they kind of have to come up with themselves. Alas, my friends, there seems to be no way to find the city of Kron. We'll have to give up our quest. Unless you don't suppose. No, oh, I have an idea. Fetch the wizard with the Comprehend Languages scroll. We'll befriend this dolphin, convince him of our ways, and he will lead us to the city. Why didn't we think of that before? I think I started Rafts of Kron at least 3 times and gave up each time. And the adventure takes a jarring turn with its final boss battle against Avelia, this underwater vampire who's on its home turf and can summon sharks and regenerate and drain levels, and, well, it's pretty much unkillable. My players never got there, but you can read plenty of accounts online on how the players who did usually don't survive that battle. But despite its problems, the ambitious setting of Rafts of Kron really inspired me to think about RPGs different than I had before. And even recently, when I wrote the free adventure, my most recent one, The Beast of Blackkeep, I included a small underwater section that was an homage to this old school adventure. Number 4, The Haunting. My first experience with Call of Cthulhu was at a game convention, where I was blown away by how different it felt versus the more adventurous RPGs I was used to playing. The contained environments, the weak investigators with interesting backstories, sanity system, and cool crafted handouts made it feel like I've discovered a brand new gaming experience. I wish I could remember what that first adventure was. If anyone was at DexCon in New Jersey in 1992 and remembers, please let me know. But after this convention game, I immediately ran out, picked up the core Call of Cthulhu rulebook, and I ran its included adventure, The Haunting, for my friends a few weeks later. The Haunting is a classic haunted house adventure. The investigators are hired to look into a mysteriously cursed Boston house with a history of madness and death. As they uncover old records and explore the decaying property, they discover a sinister presence lurking in the walls, one that refuses to stay buried. Like my own first experience with Call of Cthulhu, The Haunting was an adventure that bucked my players' expectations. There are no monsters here, no real traps, only an angry ghost who wants the investigators gone. But as the players explore, the house unveils its history and its secrets, which kept my players on edge despite not having lots of things to kill and treasures to find. And so this adventure taught me that RPGs, they don't need big action pieces to be exciting, and that you could tell a story with an environment with a history and A+ ambience. No need for mouthpiece NPCs narrating everything the players need to know. You can just do that all with the setting and backdrop and pacing of your adventure. The Haunting remains one of the best haunted house adventures out there. It's simple, it's spooky, and it's fun. While it's missing some of the deeper, more unsettling mythos elements that are core to Call of Cthulhu, it's still a great one-shot, especially if you want to break from heavier stories or just need a quick intro to new players. Check it out. Number 3, The Assassin's Knot. I received the Assassin's Knot as a birthday gift. After my friends went home, I crawled into bed, opened the module, and I honestly didn't know what to make of it at all. The entire adventure unfolds in a suspicious little town named Garrotten, where a baron has been killed.
So they named this town Garrotten, eh? And someone got murdered? Imagine that!
The adventure challenges your players to unravel this murder mystery. This is fantasy noir, layered motives, tangled alibis, and townsfolk with secrets they'd rather bury than share. The GM gets a full timeline of who did what and why, but it's the players who have to put all those pieces together. This adventure is all clues, conversation, and creeping paranoia, and every NPC might be lying. This concept blew my mind as a young GM. Murder mystery party games were the rage at the time, which I always wanted to try, but this seemed to be bringing that concept right into Dungeons and Dragons. The adventure conjured visions of my players using stealth and guile, and watching for blades in the dark, not chopping off orc heads and shooting fireballs down dungeon corridors. It was totally new. However, despite that amazing premise, The Assassin's Knot is a very flawed adventure. It's easy for the players to get stuck, and the main villain's motivation is kooky enough that few groups will ever figure it out. This is forgivable. Murder mysteries are wicked hard to design in RPGs, as unlike TV shows, players can completely miss important clues or not even meet critical characters. So even though this adventure didn't really work, I applaud its game designer, Leonard Lakofka, for trying something so bold and new. I tried running the Assassin's Knot a few times, but I just wasn't skilled enough as a GM to pull my players into the intrigue. I just couldn't capture their imagination like I wanted. But nevertheless, this adventure showed me that D&D and role-playing games in general can be used to tell stories far beyond the sword and sorcery or the dungeon fantasy ones that I was already telling with my friends. The idea that intrigue, motivated NPCs, and a well-developed setting can be more interesting than fighting orcs and dragons was a new one to me at the time. And as a result, it influenced many of my future adventures that I would write, including Thresher Manor, which is one of my most downloaded adventures. Set in the 17th century, the PCs find themselves in a cursed mansion, needing to discover the mystery of a duke's murder. While it's not as sprawling as The Assassin's Knot, I set out to do a lot of the same things the original tried to do. Number 2, the Triangle Campaign. As you can see, my early years of role-playing were almost entirely focused on fantasy. Lots of D&D, then GURPS fantasy, and then the gritty Warhammer fantasy roleplay. Those were our mainstays. But I also liked science fiction. and we would occasionally mix things up by playing Star Frontiers and the original FASA Star Trek role-playing game. And for those of you wondering, for some mysterious reason, I never stumbled across the classic RPG Traveler. I have no explanation for why. While my friends and I mostly played a lot of the Star Trek tabletop battle simulator game, which itself was an innovation as it was a fully fleshed out board game, but very playable, and it perfectly synced with the RPG. It was really cool. I'll talk about that some other time. But we would occasionally jump into some of the adventures that FASA wrote for the Star Trek RPG. FASA's Star Trek adventures were clearly labors of love. They were written by people who truly knew the material. They were always authentic, dense, and often a little too rigid as the creators tried to capture the drama of the TV show. But we had a good time with the system and its modules, and so in the late 1980s, I picked up the Triangle campaign, a massive, sprawling, galaxy-sized adventure. This year-long Star Trek module was set in the contested Triangle region, an independent conglomeration of 120 worlds sandwiched between Federation, Klingon, and Romulan space. And if you think 120 worlds is big for an adventure, it also weaved together 4 major interlocking plots. A dangerous Romulan arms dealer at work, a rogue Klingon admiral bent on usurping the Empire, an ambitious Orion pirate aiming to unite and rule his people, and the rise of a profit-driven bio-research megacorporation. There's so much stuff in here. Players play either Starfleet intelligence agents or merchant captains who must navigate espionage, political intrigue, piracy, corporate malfeasance, with each campaign strand offering hooks for missions that involve diplomacy, trade, covert ops, and planetary crises. Enterprise, I'm gonna need you to beam me off this moon. We've got Klingons, Romulans, and Orion pirates all crawling down here. I'm gonna have to have a word with our GM too. The structure of the Triangle campaign was fascinating. Instead of providing 4 standalone adventures in this region, it presents 4 plots, each with its own characters, motivations, complications, and a very detailed timeline of events. So, for example, in the plot about the rogue Klingon admiral, it starts with him arriving to the sector. He figures out a plan to slip mind-controlled drugs into a group of Orions. He builds a rogue fleet. Then one of the Orions resists the drug and starts recruiting a rebellion within that fleet. Other Klingons soon arrive, and they're very angry about this situation because he has a bad reputation, and they start influencing the sector, and it all gets very messy very fast, and the longer the PCs wait to involve themselves in this plan, then the harder it gets for them to stop. And then you multiply this times 3 other plots and those 120 planets, and well, the Triangle campaign was hugely ambitious. It's all run on timelines with ripple effects that depend on the player's actions. It required a ton of GM improvisation to work, but when it did, it was beautiful. It felt like an entire season of Star Trek right there for your players to discover. I had never seen anything as massive as this, and I still think it holds up against more modern giant campaigns, like the Drynax campaign for Traveler, Mountains of Madness for Call of Cthulhu, and the Pendragon campaign. But the Triangle campaign taught me something deeper than just how to run a giant Star Trek game. It showed me what it means to run a living world. In that sprawling web of intrigue, the NPCs weren't just quest givers or background dressing. They had goals and flaws and ambitions, and most importantly, they moved, regardless of whether the players were watching. A pirate lord might rise to power if left unchecked. A corporate plot might advance while the crew investigates something totally different. It taught me that forcing players to juggle multiple plots at the same time really challenged them to make real decisions. I learned that the best villains don't wait around in stasis. They evolve, they make choices, and sometimes they force the players to react rather than lead. It was the first time I realized that RPG storytelling doesn't just happen at the table, it also happens in the spaces between the scenes, in the ticking clock of other people's agendas. That's the kind of campaign that can become more real to your players. I'd love to see a modernization of this campaign, one that presents the information in a more friendly way to GMs so other sci-fi fans could more easily check this one out. I think that's highly unlikely, but you can still find it, so if you're a big science fiction or Star Trek fan, just give this one a read. Number 1, Keep on the Borderlands. My number 1 pick is a classic many of you will recognize, Keep on the Borderlands. I've run it more times than I can count, and I still haven't seen everything it has to offer. The Caves of Chaos are D&D to me. Dangerous, mysterious, and filled with a sense of wonder that's just never faded. I've guided dozens of new players through these caves, and the adventure has grown with me as a GM. As a kid, I ran it like a straight-up monster gauntlet. Later, I turned it into a gritty survival crawl, wearing down supplies and morale with every encounter. The Hackmaster reboot, which I played and actually is pretty great, brought out the political tensions between the monster factions in the caves, from the militant hobgoblins to the cultists of evil ape gods, and gave the whole thing a deeper edge. And years later, I ran it for my son and his friends as their first role-playing experience, and I saw the same wide-eyed excitement I felt back then reflected in their faces. I was also amazed, by the way, that running kids through this adventure, how quickly they saw analogies to Minecraft. They immediately wanted to grab pickaxes, tunnel into the caves, go deeper, find gold, and create their own fortress. Isn't it neat how this adventure, despite being almost 50 years old, still connects to the younger generation of gamers? I think that's just special. People ask me all the time whether I think Keep on the Borderlands still holds up today. And honestly, I never really know how to answer that question. It's so ingrained in my gaming DNA that I can't imagine to have gotten decades of enjoyment out of role-playing without it. But at a minimum, Keep on the Borderlands still remains a well-crafted beginner dungeon with variety, real danger, and plenty of room for GMs to add their own personality and flair. So it will always have a place at my table. And those are my top 5 most influential adventures. Like I said at the top, not all of these are worth playing again today. I probably wouldn't play a lot of them myself anymore. Rafts of Kron and the Assassin's Knot are rough by today's standards. And the Triangle campaign, while it can be mined for great sci-fi material, is a very difficult adventure to actually prepare. But both The Haunting and Keep on the Borderlands still hold up and have remained in print over the years for a reason. Have you played any of these adventures yourself? If so, let me know in the comments below what you think. And if you are inspired by some adventures early in your gaming career, let me know what those are. I'd love to find out. And if you want to see more videos like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. I would appreciate that. It really helps the channel. Until next time, I'm JC, and just remember, take a few moments to think back to your early days as a gamer. I bet you it'll conjure memories of old friends, maybe some of which you don't see anymore, and experiences you've had. And I think that's the most special thing about gaming.